Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Carry On Friends, the Caribbean American podcast. As always, I'm excited that you are joining us. My name is Carrie Ann, if this is the first time you're listening, and my guest for today is Michael. Michael, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you. So, why don't you tell the community of friends a little bit about who you are, Caribbean country you represent, and the work you do?
Okay, so I am the chairman and founder of the Caribbean American Cultural Arts Foundation. I know it's a mouthful. I'm originally from the United States Virgin Island of St. Thomas. And so our work really started back in like 2017 when there was two devastating storms that hit, well, really and truly throughout the Caribbean. Honestly and truly, it was not a good year for hurricanes, and we hope that we don't see that again. But with climate change, we're always in anticipation of that. So our work really started off in the disaster relief area, and then we went on to do senior and veteran services, and also youth arts educational programming. And on the disaster relief side and preparedness, I had a chance to work with FEMA, HHS, CDC through those storms because they came to Atlanta, Georgia, evacuated people from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and so they stayed about almost 2 years here in Atlanta. And we teamed up with Golden Cross. I think everyone knows Golden Cross, and provided meals for them. It was about 300 people, different locations. And so that was a catalyst to really kind of kickstart Caribbean American Cultural Arts Foundation. And from there, we went on to the youth arts educational program. It's called Cultural Connect. And the reason why we do that program is to help build emotional intelligence for young people, especially underserved communities who do not have the opportunity to travel to the Caribbean and be educated about the Caribbean and Latin America. I always tell them it's people that look like you that are in leadership roles, right? And so we educate them about the Caribbean, the arts, the dance, the food, music. We did one with Westminster Academy in Atlanta, and we did like a virtual marine biology class. They loved it, right? And so our program, we plan to expand on it and take it national and really kind of educate the community, especially the African American community, about the diversity in being Black in America, right? And so with that as well, we had an opportunity to, during the pandemic, to get a grant from Fulton County, Georgia, and we provided over 120 seniors and veterans free dental care. So their dentures, cleaning, everything. And so we plan to expand on that program as well because the seniors are also paramount. We really want to connect the seniors to the young people and they could share their stories. We couldn't do that during the pandemic, but that's the level of work that we do at the Caribbean American Cultural Arts Foundation, and we're so excited about the direction that we're headed to and how far we really came in just a matter of 5 years.
Wow, that's a lot of work that you've done in the 5 years. So the last point you said was you were looking forward to what's to come. What are you looking forward to? And you're based in Atlanta. What's the reach for the organization?
Our plan is, I don't know if back in the day, I'm dating myself, but used to have a cartoon called Pinky and the Brain. We're taking over the world. So we're planning to take it over the world one step at a time and really expanding throughout the United States to predominantly Caribbean areas, New York, Texas, even Los Angeles, of course, Florida as well. And those are the areas that we're looking at in reference to just right now expanding our programming and then looking at doing it throughout various different states and countries as well, and really kind of building that bridge between the Caribbean region and United States to start off with. Caribbean region, Latin America, Caribbean region, Africa, Caribbean region, Asia, and looking at expanding that over the next decade or so as we grow. We have a great board right now of professionals that are of Caribbean and Hispanic descent that are making up our board. And, we are just kind of working diligently to carefully execute what we have. And so, if you want to learn more about the organization, you could go to Caribbean Cultural Arts with an S.org. So that's Caribbean cultural arts with an S.org.
So, Michael, tell me a little bit about you and your experience just being in a truly a duality. You know, you are technically a US citizen, but you are of a country in the Caribbean, and navigating that very unique situation that you, Puerto Rico, and of course Guam and other territories have, but because you're in Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. So talk to me a little bit about what that experience was with technically being a US citizen, but living in the Caribbean, and what that meant when you came here and how people see you.
Wow. I laugh, but it's not funny. But the US part is good because then you get a jobs and you get, it makes life a lot easier. And I think that's my father's from Antigua and my mother's from Anguilla, right? And so then you moved to the US Virgin Islands because back in the 50s, 60s, that
The
was
oil refinery
right,
and
the oil refinery. And then there was a lot of racism going on in America. it was, it was a true story. My mom comes. I was in school in Fort Lauderdale at the Art Institute, and mom, she decides to go on the bus all willy nilly by herself. I tried to warn her, but she didn't want to listen. And she comes back in a tizzy. She's like 50 something at this age, and she said, "I can't believe there's a guy and he's white and he decided that he is not going to sit next to me. I cannot believe this. I've never experienced this." And I'm like, wow, 50 something, and you never really experience what racism is, right? So we live in a bubble, in the Caribbean. We live in a bubble. We don't have to worry about police pulling us over and all of that stuff, right? So coming to America, it was really about educating, especially people that look like me, right? Because a lot of my Caucasian counterparts, they had done already traveled to the Virgin Islands or Jamaica, and they go on vacation. Oh yeah, we went there, but there was people that looked like me that they were asking wild questions. Do you live in a hut? Do you, what kind of food you eat? And do you like? It was just wild. And a reason why we started a Cultural Connect program was on the sheer fact that during those storms, we had a lot of people that they evacuated that was on dialysis and cancer. And one of the nurses, there was a lady from Puerto Rico, and she said, "My husband is delayed on his plane by 1 hour." I remember it clearly. And the nurse turns to her, "Well, he's going to be delayed even more because he has to go through customs." And everybody turned around and they were like, "What are you talking about?" And so one of the other nurses that from the island say, "Are you okay? Did you check your own temperature?" She's like, Puerto Rico is a US territory. You know, so it was not funny, but it's just lack of education. As you know, as Caribbean people, we tend to get upset and we like, "Oh, how dare they?" And it's just like when you look at the social economic situation, especially for African Americans in the United States, you gotta be like, okay, why did you ask me that question? And then you have to understand there wasn't access to all of that, what we accustomed to. Like I think a lot of people back in the day would say, "Oh, these Jamaicans or these people from the Caribbean came on a banana boat." Well, the banana boat stopped many years ago. That's number one. Number two, we're coming on American and Delta. We're coming on flights. And so I remember, never forget, I was in college and one young guy, he's an African American guy, and he's like, "I've never been on a plane." And we had like, it was myself and other people from the Bahamas, and there was an audible gasp, like, "How could you not ever been on a plane?" Like, we cannot fathom because we are so accustomed to knowing that you have to get on a plane to get somewhere, right? And so that is some education that needs to happen. We have a lot of champions in the community that's like, yeah, we need to definitely educate these people about this. And I think that's coming because, I always say why we do Caribbean American cultural arts and our captains of industry is to educate. No matter what island you're from, you are viewed as one. Once you have accent, you are viewed as one landmass for some reason. And so you got to understand there's power in unity, and that's what we champion at the Caribbean Cultural Arts. We have people from all over Guyana, Virgin Islands, Jamaica that make up our board, even Latin America. And That's because we want to make sure that we reach every aspect, nook and cranny of that represents the Caribbean region. Because even though I'm from the U.S. Virgin Islands, now you can sit down with 10 U.S. Virgin Islands people and be like, "Yep, we've been asked crazy questions." And the first question is like, "Are you from Jamaica?" And like they think everybody's from Jamaica. So it's an interesting situation. And so I think education is power. And if you educate people, and we're starting with the young people, here's why: because if you plant a seed, like a mustard seed, and you let it grow, by the time those people get to college and the boardroom, as they grow, there's less resistance for the next generation of Caribbean people coming out, because then they can have a formidable dialogue with potential leaders in the community. And when I say community, corporate community. And so that's what we look at and really champion.
So the organization has a annual event. Could you talk to me a little bit more about that event and what you aim to do with that event?
So it is our fifth annual Captains of Industry Gala, and that really came out of the same storms. And we said, let's give back to disaster relief, and so every year we host this Captains Run, and it came from initially we used to do the Caribbean American Movers and Shakers. It started off exceedingly small, like a networking event, and we would recognize people from the Caribbean and the entire diaspora, and it's really to educate people and say, look, these are some major players that you look up to that is from the Caribbean. As you know, there's so many different stars that are from the Caribbean or Caribbean descent. Jay Z, Beyonce, just to name a few. Of course, everybody knows Rihanna, and people look up to these people. But are they looking at their cultural background when it comes to greatness? We know, of course, Marcus Garvey and others that have really led the way for civil rights and other things that are in America. And so that's what the whole program is about, really kind of celebrating the professional diaspora that is of Caribbean American descent, or those that are impacting Caribbean Americans in the United States. And that's what the Captains of Industry is about. And the big thing is about this organization is, after we do that fundraiser, last year we launched our Kickstart grant, and we recognized several organizations from majorates. We also did book scholarships for Tennessee State University. They have a whole delegation of Caribbean students, and we give back to them. The Atlanta Jamaica Association Scholarship Fund, so we give back scholarships to students in Jamaica as well. And so it's not just an event to have an event, it's an event with a purpose. And it helps us continue the programs that we do.
So, as you're on the podcast and we have listeners from all over the country, they're probably concentrated mostly in New York, but from all over the country and all over the world. So, big up wherever you are listening. Um, how do people get involved with the organization?
So, of course, you could go to the website, and I always say donate, 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 CaribbeanCulturalArts.org. You could also send an email and say, hey, I would like to get involved. I'd like to donate my time. I'd like to do, something with the organization. And we're always willing and opening doors. You could just send an email to connect at CaribbeanCulturalArts.org. So that's connect at CaribbeanCulturalArts.org, and they could assist in that way. Especially if you're in the New York area, please do send us an email, because we want to come to New York and have allies in New York that's on the ground, right? Because New York it's a complex city, right? You have Manhattan, Brooklyn, shout out to Brooklyn. You have Bronx, so you have the different boroughs, and so we want to make sure that we effectively reach our target market in New York. So definitely, if they could reach out to connect at Caribbean Cultural Arts with an S.org, and we'll take it from there.
So, you mentioned all the celebrities who have Caribbean heritage. Some of those proudly,
Right.
announce that Caribbean heritage. Some of them you might be surprised. Um, is that important for people to know? If they don't want to tell anyone, is that important to celebrate them if they is not celebrate them? Maybe that's not the right word I'm looking for.
Celebrate is right. I think one of the things is it's bigger than the honoree. I always say that, right? It's to educate those that don't know, right? And sometimes it's even our own children that do not know, right? I got one of our honorees last year. He said he was so happy because he brought his sons there, and the sons was able to see how all these people have impacted change in the United States, right? And I think that's one of the things that we champion, because at the end of the day, it's really about education. I think if people are educated and informed, they make less sly remarks, and they now can embrace cultural nuances better, right? And so it's interesting because when we it's so crazy when we did the meal program here in Atlanta, a lot of the African American nurses that was there, they were like, "Man, you guys really know how to do oxtails." It's like, it was like, okay, I always say this: there's oxtails, and then there's Jamaican oxtails. There's a difference. I gotta give it credit what it is, right? And so that's one of the things that they had loved the most when it was the oxtails, right? And then so there's cultural nuances that tie us all together, and it's just to identify them and make sure we bring that connection together. And part of that is breaking down the wall of ignorance and saying, "Hey, I'm going to extend the olive leaf, and you extend it back." And you'll be surprised. We learned that with the Hispanic community, and we reached out, and they can open up their arms to us. One of our board members, Ivan Shamas, he is the regional manager for Univision here in the Southeast region. And so he is like such a champion of the organization. And of course, our another board member, Yvette Thomas Henry. That's why we're hosting our event on Sunday, June 18th. We're hosting it at the Four Seasons Atlanta. And so part of that is because we have built a relationship with Four Seasons, and they invest in the program. They're like, "Hey, we're going to spend all our diversity and inclusion money here and give you X amount of real estate, and you bring your people, and we can give you the run of the building." You know, People are always amazed when they find that out. It's a very unique partnership and relationship, and everyone from the Caribbean gets to dress up and look nice, and it's not just a ball, but it's a celebration of culture and people.
When we look at Caribbean culture, because when I think of cultural arts, I also think of how we are represented in media, right?
Mhm.
And how the Caribbean, unlike other cultural demographics, doesn't really have a strong media holding. So if you wanted to see Vision related content with Asia, you there are channels for that. We already know that there's a lot of Spanish, channels. There's a lot of programming and content that you can go to X channel, this channel. Talk to me about the gap that you're seeing in Caribbean American media, lack thereof. And go ahead.
Yeah, so definitely. I also control the Caribbean Media Network website, and part of that is you would be surprised how many people in media is really, especially at BT and other networks that are a part of the instrumental part of media coverage in United States. I think part of it is I look at the Hispanic community. It's one unified front, right? I remember when the Prime Minister of Jamaica came to Atlanta, and he said, "Look, I know everybody wants to own a restaurant, right? But if you come together and you build a multi-million-dollar business, instead of making 50, $100,000 for the year, you could make 10% of $1 million, or 10% of $10 million, and be at a millionaire." And so it's coming together as one and understanding and building a network. Do I feel that Caribbean media is marginalized? Oh, 100%. I think there is a value to what we're doing as media outlets, because I was sitting and I was having a HBCU committee in Atlanta for the Atlanta Hawks, and I shared my opinion. I said, like, look, the problem with African American at this point, you had the BET News. They're like, we have no news outlet. Univision, Telemundo, they tell the Hispanic story. and there's no major black network that's telling the story. So who's telling your story? You're waiting for somebody else to tell you the story. They can't tell you your story. It's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be clear, and it's going to be marginalized. And so, if African American media is being marginalized, then we in turn end up being looped into that, right? And I champion Byron Allen for some of the work that he did. He sued everybody. Biden is suing everybody, McDonald's, everybody, because at some point, you got to say, look, you guys, you're the problem. The ad agencies who refuse to do placement and they add you to, oh, well, you don't have enough impressions. You don't have, all of those things that kind of push you out of the box, right? And so it's like, even with our foundation, we end up in a quite an interesting conundrum during the pandemic. We just applied for a grant with the community foundation here in Atlanta, and come to find out, I don't know, they had some race issues. And the lady was not giving funding to black led organizations. And that was shocking to me because this is Atlanta. It's like, you can't get any blacker than this city. And so I sent her an email. I was like, this is crazy. And like, I think they kind of stuck back. And I'm like, part of it is we have to have some, kahunas as black people and say, look, this chippiness has to stop. It really has to stop. And I think one of the things is with Byron Allen, he's like, yes, it has to stop. Oh, you're not listening to me. Oh, let me take you to court. Because that's when you're gonna start listening to the judge, right? And it's unfortunate. And I champion the work that he's doing because it's like he goes first and then everybody else could follow up and benefit from it. And we're not going to see the benefit of that for another 5, 10 years in its full glory because everything takes time, right? But I think that's why a lot of Caribbean media outlets is being marginalized because the African American media is marginalized. I don't if you remember, I think it was Black News Network, and they folded, like last year. And Byron Allen bought them out now and is reviving it, right? But it takes community leaders like that to stand up and say, look, we're not going out without a fight, And so I think that's what the whole thing is. And especially in New York, there's so much powerful Caribbean media outlets, right? That is in New York that could really champion everything. But it becomes saturated, especially in the South. Places like Atlanta and Florida. It's kind of like, well, we're not too sure, and it's like, and it's sad to say, it's a lot of many times it's people that look like us that tend to do that, right? And so we have a lot of gatekeepers, and so that's the problem that I see a lot of time. The gatekeepers is not coming to the forefront and arguing for us, if we want to call it that. And I think that's one of the things too. And the reality is like you gotta go with like blind justice. Bust down the door and be like, I don't care what you say. Okay, you stand right there. I'm gonna walk around you. Like an NBA thing. Okay, alley oop. I'm gonna and one right, and just keep moving. That's the best thing to do.
You touch on so many things, things that I've experienced and, to your point, like Black media is marginalized, Black creators don't get the same funding as non-Black creators. It's all across the board. And so we just have to, like you said, figure out how we're going to organize and mobilize and maybe sometimes not wait on a handout, just kind of.
Right. I have a saying, and I think people are like, oh man, yeah. So, I'm a tall guy. And so I'll be like, okay, so you don't want to write, so pretend I'm white, write the check. That's what I say. Pretend I am white, so write the check. That's all I say. Because at the end of the day, this what you're doing. It's like, oh well, and you think, and you're like, no, no, no. One of the things is we got to do our research when we're going into these deals and find out what our Caucasian counterparts are getting paid. And you say, I need to match it. And plain and simple. There's no way around it. Oh well, no. I'm sorry. We need to match it. No deal. I will walk away. And one of the things Issa Rae, she said the same thing. It was interesting when she did an interview. She said, she walked into thing and she pitched the HBO series that went on for several years. And the lady said, "Well, I'm not too sure." Blah blah blah. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you can't tell me about my black experience. I'm so sorry." And so she ended up what hosting different shows, or is like she's like, reality is that lady not no longer in the position that she's in, right? And so sometimes we have to speak up for ourselves. I'm not afraid to be the bad guy. I am bad to the bone. I will be like, I know this is what the status quo is. I'm going to bust down the door and knock it down. And I think that's some of the things that we do with Caribbean American Cultural Arts Foundation, because sometimes people try to pigeonhole you and like, oh no, this is what you need to do. It's like, nope. My mother didn't raise me to underestimate myself, and that's what a lot of Caribbean people pride. I think sometimes we live in the Americas and we kind of water down who we are, and we got to realize your parents and your grandparents, they work really hard to get you here. And so you cannot water down who you are for anyone. That is who you are. That's your culture. You will come from a rich history, especially the Caribbean. We were not the best slaves that came off the boat. That's why they kicked us off in the Caribbean. So, we got to fight. I remember talking to a colleague of mine, African American, and she's like, how did you guys get free? I was like, listen, every island has its own story. And you have to ask yourself, how did these slaves on these different islands, surrounded by water, there was no boat coming to rescue you to free you. Was it? You got to revolt. And so they were like, this is why you guys are so spicy. You're just so spicy. You're like, yeah, we are. Because we learn how to fight. And part of that is also handing down that education and generations handed down. And in the Virgin Islands, the slave was Queen Mary, and she literally the story. They have a whole song about it. Queen Mary, where you gonna bun next? She started from one side of St. Croix and bun straight up to the opposite side. And it's historical context. And they said slave masters all run to the governor house. The governor had to send over a letter. They had to ship the letter. So they were in the house for like 30 days because they had to send a ship to get help. It was a serious thing, but it freed the slaves, and that was one of the things that is Catholics, and of course the in Jamaica they have the story as well. Of I think it's a nanny, but I mean it's like so much history. Haiti, because Haiti revolted, that's how America ended up getting Louisiana, right? And so all of that's historical context. And I'll be honest, I'll be truthful, and I'll go on record and say like without the Caribbean influence to in America, I'm not too sure African Americans would have been this far, if you want to call it being far in America, if you didn't have the Marcus Garveys and the revolts and different things that was happening, and people coming out to the Caribbean and saying, "Oh, nope, we're not going to sit in the back of the bus. We're going to be champions." And that was also interesting because we had in 2019 our Marcus Garvey Leadership Award went to Ambassador Andrew Young. And several people asked me, why you choose Andrew Young? Is he from the Caribbean? I said, no, but you're going to wait and hear his story. And so he gets up on stage and he says, Jamaica plays a very important role in the civil rights movement because when they could not sit in diners and they couldn't sit on the bus, they would fly to Jamaica and realize, hey, look, there's police here, there's different, like, and they were felt so relaxed there. That's where they plan out a lot of the civil rights movement in Jamaica. And so that's how important that was, right? And so, our rich history, you don't want to water it down whatsoever because it is just, it's so rich, you might have to need a chaser with it, if you want to call it that.
Michael, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing what you've learned. That story from Ambassador Andrew Young. I think I've shared before the commencement speech that Dr. Martin Luther King gave at the University of the West Indies in the 60s, and pictures of them always in Jamaica. So thank you for sharing a snippet of that story and talking about the Caribbean American Cultural Arts Foundation. And so why don't you tell everyone where we're on social media, because it's Caribbean Cultural Arts plural.org. That's the website. Any social media handles that you want to share.
So you all you gotta do is pull up at Carib Cultural Arts, at Carib Cultural Arts, and you should pull up our Instagram. You should be able to link through our Facebook. We're not big on Twitter that much, but we do have a Twitter page. But you should be able to pull up all our handles and connect with us. It's at Carib without an E Cultural Arts, and you should be able to pull us up on social media.
Wonderful. Thank you again for being on the podcast. And I'm hoping to continue connections with you and the organization. And as I love to say at the end of every episode, walk good.